Webcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our July California Brokers Business Accelerator on lease options and everything you need to know, hosted by our wonderful Riverside broker, Mary Jane Morris, but also featuring a panel of our other California brokers, Tom Bullock and Stephen Rowe. We do have a special guest joining us on the webinar today. Jessica Crumbaugh is going to give a little bit of an announcement.
Oh, hi, everyone. Good morning. All I wanted to say that I wanted to jump in and talk to you guys and take a minute to say thank you to all of you for being with Alice and James family. This company is growing more and more every day. And as of today, we are at 1,230 agents, which is a huge number. And I just wanted to let you know how grateful we are to have you be part of the family. I pulled some number, and it's like real estate, and I just realized that over 60% of the people that join the company is because of Alice and James agents. They refer us the agent, and that's 60% of the people we're hiring. They were referred by an Alice and James agent, or they're coming back to Alice and James. So I just wanted to take a minute of my time and just say thank you for being a part of our family. And I also wanted to take a minute to say thank you to all our California brokers. You guys you are such lucky to have these 5 brokers around you. Steve Rowe, which he's the new addition to the team, MJ, Omar, Tom, and Jeff Green. This is a full house support, and all of them are just great, and they help each other. And this is so priceless. One of them going on vacation, the other one's going to jumping. They work together to help you guys in the whole state of California. So I really want to take a minute and say thank you to all the brokers for everything you do for the agents. Last and not least, what's new with the company? As you all received an email last week, we just opened a new company called Signature Transaction Coordinator. It is an in-house TC company. And I'm very proud to let you know that we partner with MJ, which is one of our brokers who has this company for over 15 years now. And they know what they're doing. They are all licensed TC, and we're so happy to have them as our partner here in Alice and James. The reason we do that is we see a lot of agents struggling with a file, and we realize that when you deal with in-house TC, it will help you to close your file faster and get paid at closing if you have to wait to get closing because you're late on your paperwork or you're late on approval because you're missing some documents. So I just wanted to let you know that the partnership is with MJ, one of our brokers, and we're so glad to be partnered with her. She's such a great broker, and now she's bringing 15 years plus, and I think I'm wrong. I think it's 20. MJ, correct me. Is it 20 years?
Yeah, we're coming up on 20.
Yeah, 20 years experience in the TC business. All right, so that's it. I'm going to pass the mic to Tori.
So I just want to let you guys know, if you do want to learn more about the signature transactions, please go ahead and visit the Alice and James University dashboard and click on the TC services button down here at the bottom. From there, you'll be taken to a page where you can fill out a form to learn more, or you can get your first transaction started right away. Before the webinar ends, I will go ahead and provide a link in the chat box of this webinar. That way you can go ahead and visit it, fill out your form, and get started. For $99, you can't go wrong. You can get your first transaction just for $99, which is incredible. So with that said, I would now like to pass the mic over to our wonderful brokers, starting with Mary Jane. Good morning, MJ.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jessica, for that lovely speech this morning. That is great. We have 5 licensed TCs who don't have anybody's less than 5 years full-time real estate experience. So Hope you'll give us a try. I'm going to switch to our topic for the day now of lease options and you. These are starting to come up more and more. And so when I had my opportunity to be the presenter today, I wanted to use this as a subject so that we can record it and have it available to you. They're starting to happen more often, and I want you to have a chance to understand it. Before I get too further along, my guest today is Annie Taylor from North American Title. Annie and I go back, she's an escrow officer, senior escrow officer. Her credentials are here on the screen now. We go back pretty much the better part of 30 years now, and we our kids used to play on the floor of her escrow company, and she's been around a long time. She's been a title officer. She's owned a 1031 company. She's an expert in lease options. Somebody needs to mute their screen. I mean their mic. We're picking you up in the background. Okay, so welcome, Annie. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Glad to be here. If anybody has any questions, just let me know.
They can go ahead and type those into the chat box, and Tori will help us get to those. If she thinks it's urgent, she'll tell us now. Otherwise, we'll probably get to those at the end. I have asked Annie to feel free to submit anything that she thinks as we're going along about this type of transaction. I also want to open that invitation to the other brokers as well. So having said that, let's jump in. So what is a lease option? A lease option is a traditional rental situation where the person also has an option of buying the property for a period of time at a certain price. So we are starting to see these more and more out there. And so a lease option, again, is an opportunity to lease a property with an option to buy it at a particular price for a period of time. Lots of agents don't know about this type of deal, and I wanted to explain why. As usual in real estate, it's location, location, location. California has such a competitive market for properties across the board. Who doesn't want to live in California? I know not everybody, but most people consider it a dream type lifestyle, and I know I'm a lifetime Californian. So in other states where properties are very hard to sell and they languish, these become an excellent option. Because of the opportunity for properties to languish on the market for whatever reason, they are starting to be more popular in California as well. I have done these my whole career. I don't think twice about them. They are full transactions, and we're going to talk about the math, the secret math, and also how to get paid. Most people shy away from lease options because they don't feel like it's a deal that's closing for a period of time, and they don't practice them. There are agents in the United States who do nothing but these. They shop them for themselves. They shop them for their clients, and we're going to talk a little more about that. So there are three types of lease options. A straight lease option, which is the one I described to you twice this morning. And then there's two other kinds, if you were to Google it up, a sandwich lease option or an assignment lease option. I want to talk about double escrows here in a second, but a sandwich lease is a lease in which a party rents the property from one owner and then leases it out to another person, meaning that the party both collects rent and pays rent. Also, an assignment lease option is where you go into, like I said, even agents or realtors themselves will put these properties at the right price. They don't have to go move into them. They don't, to lease a property, you don't actually have to live there. So occasionally agents will do these themselves to secure a property at a certain price for a window of time so that they can resell it with capability of being an entitled party to the transaction. Now, I want to talk about very briefly that you will rarely see a sandwich or an assignment option in California because double escrows are not allowed in California. Ann, you want to tell me what a double escrow is?
Double escrow is when they buy the property, like an investor or somebody buys the property and then actually turns around and sells it. Usually it's within 90 days.
and often at a different price, of course.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, they make a profit. That's the whole point of it.
So the reason that they're illegal is that they're not illegal in California if the seller knows and approves of the new price and terms in the second transaction, which is highly unlikely.
Correct. Here at North American, we actually have a form that we have all parties sign, and basically it just lets them know that they are aware that this property is a double escrow, that it is being resold at a profit. Doesn't necessarily always say what the profit is, but all parties will be aware that it's being resold for a profit.
So as long as you can have a great escrow officer like Annie who can help, whose company has already built in some notification for you, you can do this. But I want to make sure that you understood the term double escrow. So I wanted to talk to you about that a little bit this morning. So what kind of properties are good candidates for a lease option? Long days on market, overpriced. We certainly have had both those situations. Vacant and mortgages being carried. They've already moved, or they've already bought their second property. The tenant that they thought was going to be there a long time is out, and now they're carrying the mortgage. Free and clear properties. Oh, I got a little typo there. I see it now. Free and clear properties, and any property really where the seller is okay with being a landlord. These are all, and rentals in general. Rentals in general. Where do you get these sellers and buyers? Directly from the MLS. You can get them from Craigslist, word of mouth, signs on corners, ads. Due to the limitations of GoToMeeting, I wanted to run a YouTube video for you that actually demonstrated agents calling to obtain information and find out whether people were willing to rent to own. These calls are much easier than they sound, and I am providing the links at the end, or at least a copy of the link that you can cut and paste into your browser and go straight to. In Texas, there's a agent that does nothing but these full-time, teaches them house for 7. She does great demonstrations on what these phone calls sound like. Most people bump into them when a buyer is already a tenant and would like to buy it, or is in the process of moving anyway, and they would like to make a more permanent arrangement with the seller, or the seller wants somebody who's more permanent in the transaction. So I want to talk about this a little bit. How does a real estate agent get paid on a lease options? Most people are only familiar with you being able to be paid at close of escrow period, which is maybe 1, 2, 3, as much as 5 years out, which is discouraging, and to real estate agents, just specifically for this type of transaction. But it doesn't have to be. You can be paid at the time that you've gone to accepted lease, where the entire thing is. Usually, I suggest that half now and half at close is usually what I ask you to factor in when you're deciding how much money the buyer is going to need to consummate this transaction. And then, of course, the one we're all familiar with, at the time of the entire transaction closes, escrow at the end of the option period. I've asked Ann to discuss with us this morning the precautions that are taken when you obtain a commission before a property is completely sold. Miss Ann?
Yes. So as you all know, you can't take a commission until the transaction is closed. So the way with a lease option, what you have to do is you have to have the file actually closed by recording what's called a memorandum of agreement. That document actually gets recorded. It lets the public know that there is, in fact, a lease in place. It gives them some particulars about the lease, but not a lot. And then that particular transaction it closes. We close. At that point, we can pay the commissions because the lease part of it is now closed. I've seen many different ways of commissions being paid. Some of it is part of it's paid through that first part, and then they get the rest when the actual sale goes through, if it goes through, or they get the whole amount. It's whatever it is agreed to by the parties.
That you're able to negotiate, which we're going to talk a little bit about in the what I always like to call the secret math for lease option. So moving on, so we're going straight to that subject. We're going to talk about the secret math of money. What money facts do you need to know to negotiate lease options? So The simplest one, and I decided to start here, is when a buyer, as a listing agent, if a buyer's agent or a buyer approaches you and says they want to do a lease option, your first question is, how much do you have down? You do not, they will often be fishing or beginning negotiations by saying, how much do you need? I want you to understand that if they've got 100,000 to put down, we can take 100,000. It does not have to be limited to what they to closer to the rent or anything like that. So I want you to understand that when you get these calls as a listing agent, or a buyer is indicating that he wants to do a transaction, a lease option, how much money are you sitting on is the only thing you need to know for a buyer, because very likely, because of the lease option, they've got at least the security deposit and plus the rent and maybe a little more. But I've had many of these where people will tell me they've got 100,000 or 65,000 or 50,000 or something like that, which makes it much easier to put these deals together. So any comment on the buyer's math, Miss Ann?
I'm sorry, what was that again?
I was just asking you any comment on my buyer's math indication.
No, not unless somebody has a question.
Okay. All right. I wanted to mention too that whatever the number turns out to be that they're going to put down, it can be used, the exact same 10 grand can be used for the option fee, the lease deposit, and finally the EMD amount. So if they've only got 10,000 or whatever the number is, enough to secure the deposit and the rent, that number can be used 3 times over, meaning they don't have to have 10,000. I just used 10,000 for example. They don't have to have it 3 times. It will be the option fee. It will be the lease deposit. And then finally, when they open escrow, if that same amount will show as their earnest money deposit. It only has to be agreed what will credit upon sale and what will not be credited if the buyer fails to complete closing escrow. Meaning if you don't close, you're not getting any of it back, not even as a renter. You're not getting the deposit back. If they are unable to close and the seller is willing to treat it as a lease deposit, they may be able to get it all back, but mostly they do not. Mostly whatever you put down is going to be eaten up under the option fee, and you will only get the benefit of it if you close escrow as your earnest money deposit.
Just one more thing. This is Annie again. One more thing to add is that if they're going to keep that money in the escrow and have it stay there, like I have a couple of them right now that are actually staying for the full year. They want the 10,000. I have one that's 5 and one that's 6, and the money is staying until they exercise their option. So it'd be up to the year. All you guys need to understand is even when this thing, let's say it does not go through and it cancels, as you all know, we need a cancellation, a signed cancellation. When that does not go through, this only happens if they do not exercise their rights to purchase the property. There does need to be another instruction where both parties agree to release those funds. Even if you've said in the contract that it's supposed to go to the seller, or this amount goes to the seller, and this amount goes to the buyer. The reason for that is escrow needs to make sure nothing happened during that time that changed those terms, and we can't just take one side or the other. So you'll still have to have a signed agreement as to where the funds are going to need to go.
This runs right up against the same problem we have liquidated damages. Very often, as we're canceling standard transactions, after the contingencies are being removed, the seller or the agent will mention to me that we know we're qualified for the liquidate the deposit. They removed all their contingencies. We're going to liquidate the deposit. You still can't get it out of escrow until you have both signatures. So one of the tips that I give in general on standard transactions is if they're asking for an extension, try to get the deposit released while they're happy and needing something. But in general, this works very similar to your standard release after they've done contingency removals. So
we actually had a quick question come in regards to that. So to get half at close of the lease portion, does that payment come out of the EMD?
We're going to go into the seller's math now, and you're going to see all the things you have to factor in to decide if there's enough money. If you have a buyer that's only got enough for the lease and the deposit, you're probably not going to get paid. But the reason I call it the secret math is because the next pages that I'm going to go over are going to be all the factors that you just need to know, so that you can decide which of these factors is going to be the ones that are useful in the preliminary stages of a lease option. Meaning you're not going to get everything you want. You're only going to get half of what you want, or you're only going to get, depending on the demands of the seller, and we'll go over that in just a minute. But let me get through the seller's math, and if you still don't understand, feel free to ask again. So going over the secret math. For a seller to want to do this type of deal, basically these are the numbers you should have at your fingertips. Obviously, the offer price from the MLS, how much ever money the buyer has admitted that he has, how much the seller was supposed to net after the sale. So occasionally a seller would be willing to do this if he could get out the part that was going to be his anyway. So it's a $300,000 property and he was going to net $100,000. If he could get his money out to go on and do what he was going to do, buy another property, invest, pull that money for whatever reason, sometimes they will only do it when they can get their net out. So if this is a good factor, because if their net is very small, it's much easier to convince the seller that they're not in any risk of losing anything. Not that they are anyway, because they'll continue paying the mortgage themselves with the rental monies. But it is a factor that you need to know. How much are they netting? And then the option price, how much the seller wants actually for the option alone. And then going over what Annie and I spoke about just a moment ago, how much of that is going to be creditable, how much of that is going to go into the next transaction. Of course, what is the actual PI, TI, and HOA amount for the rent to keep everything paid that needs to be paid on that property? That, of course, is your basic, a basic number that you have to do with lease options. So obviously, I would think it's rare to never that a person would carry in a lease option. I guess they could if they were desperate enough to unburden themselves of a payment. They might eat a couple $100, but it would be unlikely. So you want to make sure you're getting, and the monthly rent always includes the PI, TI, and HOA, plus any of funds the buyer wants credited every month. Sometimes they use it like a little savings plan. So on top of the rent, I'm going to give you $100, $200, $500 on top of all that, so that at the time that I execute that, I'll have another $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. My down payment will already have been collected and be ready to be credited. Another thing another number that I want you to have in your head is a pad for evictions. Whatever the amount of money that the seller is, because an option is recorded in the form of an assignment, it will prevent the seller from selling it. And so if they will have to complete the eviction and get finish up that transaction before they can move on. So I would like you to think about what the pad for eviction is. Usually $3,000 to $5,000. Another benefit is who's going to get the tax credit. The IRS law says that the person who gets the earned interest credit is the person who paid it. So even if the buyer could negotiate that, even though the statement comes from the mortgage company at the end of the year in the original seller's name, he's not necessarily entitled to it unless he actually paid it. So I did some serious research on this years ago, and the actual answer I was given from the IRS on their 1040 line was the person who pays it. So if you're factoring, if there's some reason that you need to know, tax credit may come up. There's also holding costs that you might need to know. I use a nice little company called Note World, and they are a private mortgage service company. They will collect from the buyer monthly, and they will make the mortgage payment monthly. The reason I like to do this as a real estate agent is because I hate, certainly we all discovered this during the short sale market, that sellers were collecting money and not making the payments anyway. So This reassures both the seller and the buyer that the money will be collected and that immediate action will be taken by an appropriate party to, it's really much less than this. I rounded up to 50. I've seen them for 25 and 28 dollars a month. So holding costs. And now we get to the big question. How much in all of this is available for commissions? So if the buyer has that number that we talked about at the beginning, a big number like 100,000, and your buyer and your seller's only going to net 20, clearly there's room to pay net, or if he doesn't need to net every dollar of it out. So this is where, against these other thoughts, you have to decide whether you can be paid before, during, or after. And then I put at the bottom total if we were lucky. So if we were to do all of these things, if we were to get every one of these privileges, how much would the seller need to collect from the buyer? And that's when we start getting into serious numbers. Over my career, and Ann will probably say the same, we have seen, you know, buyers come in, you know, what do we call that? Mattress money. You know, they have terrible credit, but they've been stashing away that money. I went to one buyer's house, and he took it out of the valance, the puffy valance above the curtains. He literally pulled the cash out of there. So there are lots of people who have cash but don't necessarily have credit. And while they're taking the time to get that sorted out, with a great company we have here in Temecula that is nationwide, called Dedicated Credit Repair, who only fixes it when you are able to fix your credit, not while it's happening, not while you're unable to make to straighten it out. But also your lenders are commonly good at getting things out of the way so that the person can get a traditional loan, whether it's FHA or VA or whatever else is holding them up. So I hope that answered the question that we got. If not, please feel free to pose it again. These are the documents you're going to need every single time you do one of these, and these are considered a package together. You're going to need the option agreement, you're going to need your regular old RPA, and you're going to need the residential lease. Besides telling you today what you need to do a lease option, if you take each one of these documents individually, you'll see that they're not hard to fill out. Most of you, if not all of you, have done a standard RPA over and over again, and it's going to look just like an RPA. How much is going to be the deposit? How much is going to be the down payment? How much cash are they going to put through? You ask for your usual title insurance, NHDs. It is a traditional RPA. The option agreement will lay out the period of time for the option and how much the option itself costs, and also whether any portion of it will be applied to the sale of the escrow, the sale of the property when the time comes to close. And then finally, a residential lease. Again, individually, all of these documents are standard and usual to us. In this case, they're going to be used together. Now, obviously, I'm not going to show you every document, but I wanted to give you a couple of pointers here. I usually, you'll see I circled at the top the 45 days. I usually like to give the buyer a pretty good window to close once the time comes for him to close. So in general, I try to give him 45 days, every opportunity to close in a reasonable amount of time. And then at the very bottom, I noted this, and this line will be on all three documents. The RPA, the option agreement, and the residential lease are all part of one agreement. And you're going to repeat that line on every single one of the documents, just one after another, so that they are not independent of each other. It's a very important point. Then I just wanted to show you what the option agreement looks like. You know, how long they have to buy it. It'll be from acceptance date to 1, 2, 3 years after acceptance. I will tell you that every buyer would like something like 5 years, and every seller would like 6 months to a year. Somewhere between those two is what really happens. Almost always 2 to 3 years. partially because obviously the seller wants to eventually wrap this up, and so does the buyer, of course, but also because once you've agreed to a price, you're stuck with it. So if the market suddenly is available with an additional, the market goes up and the property is worth more to the seller, he is obligated to sell at the price that he agreed to, which, by the way, is a good point I want to make. All of these sales prices can be any number whatsoever. You don't have to sell at market value. You don't, so if this is why they're good for overpriced properties. When the seller is determined it's going to be sold for a particular number, it can be sold for that number because the buyer is potentially getting a property that's going to be worth more 2 to 3 years out. And that might be a way for the seller to get what he wants, but not today. So it's an important point. And then the last thing is just your standard residential lease. I didn't put the whole thing in here. I just remind you, number 3A, that it's PITI plus the HOA. Who's going to collect the rents? You'll see that I used the $10,000 security deposit, which, as I mentioned, was the sample number I was using for this class. It can be used as the option, and then the lease deposit and the EMD when the time comes. Obviously, we're hoping the buyer's going to confess that he has much more money than this so that everybody can get paid, and maybe we can net the seller out. And for us to get as many of those things that are available to us off the secret math list. And then, unfortunately, as I mentioned, we couldn't run the YouTube videos through this format, but both of these videos, if you cut and paste them out and put them in your browser, take you directly to a real estate agent making cold calls to obtain lease options for her people. And one of these is a brand new home. So it is very, I want you to see, once you see this demonstration, you'll be like, I can do this. I could definitely do this. So I wanted you to have the opportunity to see these two demonstrations. It is literally this easy, although I know once you try to take it in whole, it feels bigger than it is. But with the benefit of the secret math, you should be able to factor in everything and get as many of the benefits for as many of the people as possible and still close a transaction and potentially be paid at the time that the, what did you call it, Anne? Agreement is assignment. What is it?
Memorandum. It's a memorandum of agreement.
Memorandum of agreement is recorded. This is going to wrap up for me unless anybody has questions or comments. Anne, is there anything that I've left out or that you wish I had added?
No, this sounded perfect.
Okay. Anything from our brokers or our audience?
This is Steve. I'm just, one of the thoughts on collecting commission, it's also possible for an agent to do basically two commissions. Collect a commission on the lease itself, which would be just a percentage of the, if it's a 1-year lease, it wouldn't be uncommon to do a 3 or 4 or 5% of the total lease amount, and then then collect the commission on the sale when it is consummated. So that's another option that I may consider. Also, just one of the cautions for everybody on this, and MJ already mentioned this, is to structure this in a way that satisfies and works for both parties is not always easy, because if the market is going up, then quite often it's going to be more in the favor of the buyer than the seller. If it's going down, it may be the other way around. So both sides need to understand the dynamics of agreeing to a price on something that's not going to happen for a year or two, because I haven't been able to predict the future, and I don't know of any who are able to get there.
Yes, those are always all good points. Again, I not to oversimplify it, but each of these pieces that I showed you in the secret math are the chess pieces. You're going to be moving around to put every person in the transaction and to get the best for them. Obviously, there are still power positions. The seller still has most of the say. The buyer still has least of the say. agents are certainly not even principals to transactions, so they're just looking out to see whether they can get paid partially or in full. But I don't want anybody to think that it was impossible to be paid on lease option until it closes. I also wanted to mention, Ann, briefly, that many escrow companies won't hold transactions that long, which is part of the reason I wanted you on.
Oh, sure. No problem. We don't have a problem with that, so just let us know.
I've always felt that Ann did a very pure kind of escrow, in that if it's the intention of all parties for the deal to sit in her office for 2 years, then it just sits in her office for 2 years. Some companies won't do it, but we have a resource for you if you would like the money to sit in escrow while the lease option is playing out. They have to notify, the seller has to notify the buyer about 6 months ahead of the option time that they are getting within the option period, but a good mortgage service company, as I mentioned to you before, will be able to keep you coloring between the lines on that sort of issue. That brings us to thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me individually. Since we're recording this, I'll go ahead and give my number, which is 619-249-3734. And I will certainly in Riverside County and be happy to walk you through what you have to do, the thought processes, and who's got how much, and get you all set up. I'm sure the other brokers would as well. So if we don't have any other questions.
We actually have a couple questions that came through.
Okay.
What option price amount have you noticed being common as a percentage of the purchase contract?
Literally any number. I use 10,000 because it sounds like a reasonable number without being crazy, but it's really, it honestly could be $1. So there's also, please remember in the law that there is valuable consideration. It could be anything. It could be, I took a commission once upon a time for 2 Cadillac convertibles that were sitting in a garage. Ann and I did an escrow, I'm not sure she'll remember, but years ago for a boat and for an engagement ring. And also, it can also be for love. Love is valuable consideration as well. So when a parent's trying to do a child a favor or something like that, there doesn't have to be, valuable consideration can be anything as long as it is valuable to the parties that are presented. Usually, it would be nice to see that the buyer has some money before the seller ties himself up. So, but the ones that have been brought to me most recently are almost straight rentals, where they're maybe going to put another couple $100 on top of the transaction to have some money when the time closes. But I've seen these done where, you know, that literally they're either not charging or they're using the number all the way through the transaction. I said that the deposit money will be both the option money, the lease deposit, and the EMD at the time of close. So once again, I want to direct you back to the seller's math, that you're going to try to move as many of these. By having that knowledge, it's very easy to move the chess pieces around and see who's on first, as they say, who's got the best opportunity to negotiate. I hope that answered that question.
Perfect. Another question we got was, it sounds like you're using the same EMD for 1 EMD, 2 security deposit, and 3 to pay the agent the first half. Can you clarify that?
You bet. So keeping in mind that the seller may need a certain amount of money. If he doesn't need the net and he's only looking to lease this property at this time and basically try to start forgetting about it because he really, really wants to sell it, maybe he's going to be out of state or whatever, the amount of money that comes through, which is why the first question I said you asked the buyer is how much money you got, or how much were you thinking of putting down, or how much did you want to put into this transaction. You'll know immediately if there's room for you to get paid up front or you're going to have to be paid at the end. Up until recently, I had seen enough money passion. Of course, as an escrow officer, I saw a lot more opportunity where people had money than I do as a realtor. You know, most of the time we're the ones trying to locate that money. So you're going to find out very quickly whether there's enough money in the transaction to even pay you half as well. And I've seen transactions where the amount of the deposit wiped out, the seller wouldn't get anything at the time of the lease because it paid off the realtor. If you are a strong negotiator and they understand what you've done for them and you seem like you're on top of it, your opportunity to negotiate for yourself as well are going to be higher. Do we have any more?
Okay, let me check. I'm not seeing any others that I was not able to answer. So I guess that wraps it up. Tom, did you have anything you wanted to add in? Tom is around. All right, then we'll go ahead and wrap this up. So thank you, everyone. Oh, there you are. Hi, Tom. You don't have anything to add. Perfect. All right. So thank you, everyone, for joining us on another California Brokers Business Accelerator. Of course, a special thank you to MJ for putting together such a great topic and presentation. And of course, a thank you to our other brokers and Annie for their wonderful input. We will see you all next month where we will be discussing key issues in real estate advertising, hosted by our Northern California broker, Stephen Rowe. Thanks again for joining, and I hope you all have a wonderful week. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.